So welcome. This is the fourth episode of Labels and Legacies, which is a series of free monthly panel sessions from Diversity and Ability, where Diversity and Ability's CEO, Atif Choudhury, will be joined by expert speakers. And together they'll entangle the theoretical approaches to create real, tangible solutions that foster intersectional diversity and inclusion in the workplace and beyond. So our last session in November heralded the beginning of Disability History Month, and now we're nearing its end. Have you witnessed any behaviour changes in your workplaces, environments, or social circles over the course of this month? That's not a rhetorical question. Feel free to let us know in the comments whether you've been part of any events or conversations that have felt powerful or useful or positive over the course of this month. For us, we see how Disability History Month can be done right and how it can be done wrong. As with all awareness events, whether that's days, weeks, or months, it can, as a member of the community involved, feel very tokenistic or empty without real follow-up action, which I think brings us nicely to today's discussion, which is from bias to belonging, how to make inclusion explicit. Our panelists are here to unpack and explore the power and purpose of unconscious bias training and how to embed a practice of cultural humility in the workplace and beyond. Cultural humility is a term that might come up throughout the panel. And just to let you know, if you haven't heard that term before, it's about self-reflecting on your own beliefs and behaviors, values and habits, and making space to respect and honor and listen to those same factors in others as well. I won't say much more as I want to give our panelists the floor, but first I'll introduce them. So firstly, we have Atif Choudhury. As always, he's our chair for the day. Atif is the CEO and co-founder of Diversity and Ability. He's an award-winning social entrepreneur with a background in economic justice and disability inclusion. As well as DNA, Atif also co-founded Zaytoon CIC, is an advisor to the World Health Organization Rapid Assistive Technologies Board and a trustee for Disability Rights UK. We also have Hannah Litt joining us. Hannah is an award-winning equity, diversity, inclusion and anti-racism senior leader and speaker. Hannah was credited as a top 10 influential Muslim in the UK and awarded Inspiring Automotive Women 2021 and 2022. Where she spoke about the importance of role models and the lack that she had growing up as a South Asian Muslim woman from the East African Diaspora with ADHD, OCD, Fibromyalgia, Idiopathic Intracranial Hypertension, and PCOS. Her experience spans across various industries, and she is currently working in anti-racism enabling technology for Mindweaver, where she focuses on making sure people, systems, and processes are redesigned in equitable ways while supporting organizations to be intersectionally anti-racist in a sustainable way. And finally, we have Vic Mazonas. Vic is an autistic queer person with CPTSD who occasionally experiences nonverbal episodes. They are also a regularly exhibiting artist, a sought-after public speaker, and general manager of GAIN. Vic is fortunate to have a life filled with neurodivergent queer community and has seen firsthand how transformative it can be to have a space filled with understanding and acceptance. After the insurance industry gave them their first opportunity to thrive in the workplace, Vic now seeks to help make the financial services industries a haven for others who haven't yet received the same good fortune. And just a little bit about Diversity and Ability. We're an award-winning social enterprise led by and for disabled people. We advocate for social change, equity and inclusion on the macro and micro scale, delivering training and consultancy on intersectional disability inclusion across the globe. Behind me is a QR code where you can find out more about our work dismantling intersectional barriers. And a final note before we start, the captions are enabled, so you can access those if you find that beneficial. I'll also be pasting each question to the chat as we reach it to aid with processing. And finally, over the past 4 months, we've been really grateful for everyone's contributions to the conversation here before, during, and after each panel. So please keep it up, use the chat, and also please share your thoughts on social media using the hashtag, which you can see on the screen. It's hashtag labels and legacies. We've added our name on LinkedIn to the slide behind me as well, but we'll also paste our handles into the chat and that hashtag so that you can connect with us that way throughout the panel as well. I'm now going to stop sharing that screen and hand over to Atif to begin the discussions.
Thank you, Ellie. And thank you all of you in the audience who's joining us today, from wherever you are. And a special thanks has got to be to my guests today, Hannah and Vic. I'm big fans of both of you respectively in different ways. And I want to just say that because it's exciting me to have you here today. And the conversation we're having, which, we're going to go take on have a conversation over the next hour, where it goes, the direction it goes, what it might offer an audience that struggles to be in conversations like this, we'll see. But I really would love to, as many people as possible, to give feedback as to what they've liked about it, the courage behind the conversation we're having, and and whether it meets the expectations and needs that you have. So today's conversation is From Bias to Belonging: How to Make Inclusion Explicit. It's a provocation, I guess, because to a certain extent, it's asking a question: how to make inclusion explicit? And is that a question, a demand? Is it an assurance? And maybe even, is it a reality? So that's the work really that we're doing here, is to question all those things in ourselves, in the work that we do, and the richness of that work, but also to think about where we are leaving people behind, if at all. And what do we learn from that? So I'm going to ask 3 questions really, and then a question that I like to ask at the end, which I've asked for everybody, which I'll save that to the end. But for the moment, I'm going to start asking the first question, and this one is for you, Vic, and then to Hannah, which you both have the same question on this one, which is, Vic, what do you think of when you hear people talk about implicit bias training or unconscious bias training?
So when I think about implicit bias and unconscious bias training, I always think it sounds like a nice idea and a good start, but I worry that we really don't go far enough. I think it's really easy for it to get treated as a tick box exercise. We've completed our unconscious bias training course. You get 1 session a year. There you go. You're no longer biased. You no longer have unconscious bias. You're cured. But actually, the whole point of unconscious bias is that it's unconscious. It's something that is embedded in people, and we often have no idea of the biases that we hold. We can be taught about the concept, and we can be taught how it can impact the world, but learning how to dismantle it internally isn't something you can do in a single session. That's lifelong work. If I sound like I've got my act together on this, it's because I have notes, I practiced, I prepared. I probably still won't keep on script. But, it's when you think about moving from that training to actually growing as a person and doing the work that you need to do, there's a lot of vulnerability involved in that. I think most people, when they get told that they're biased towards something, they get defensive. They don't want to hear that. They think, well, I'm a good person. I don't treat people this way. And it goes from, here is a behavior you're doing that is something you can work on, to here is a judgment of you as a person. And it's really difficult to get people to move past that and be vulnerable. I wonder sometimes if it's entirely possible to do that in the workplace, where all of us are kind of masking the most vulnerable sides of ourselves every day anyway, because you need to present a professional face. I think it's good that it happens in terms of at least starting the conversation, and I'd rather have us talk about it than not talk about it. But I think it's something that really needs to evolve beyond that kind of, here is a training course, into here is a way we can review the way we look at each other and ourselves. Something like that.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, lots of things to think about there, and lots of things that get thrown up in these conversations. Sometimes make you feel like you're going to throw up. They're not meaningful enough. I don't think any workshop in the world can really truly transform the biasism or the structural urgencies to build change in this country or other countries. But there is a lot expected of workshops, and you've rightly said, it's almost like there's this workshop that we can do, and that we're not racist anymore. But I wonder if perhaps there's a lot to be said, which I'm going to pause on. But I think it's really touching on the idea of what is racism. Is it about defensive postures and our interpersonal relationships with people? And there's something about, do we agree that that's what racism is? And perhaps that's a question. And there's the courage of another way of looking at racism, if that's all biases that are hardwired into the fabrics of the world we live in, the society we're in. But I don't know. Well, I do, but I've got feelings on it, but that's not for now. It's more just to enjoy the time with you guys and the audience. So I'm going to ask the same question, Hannah, to you. I'll read it out loud. What do you think of, Hannah, what do you think of when you hear people talk about implicit bias training or unconscious bias training?
You said it perfectly earlier. It makes me want to be sick. You can't train the bias out of anyone. So I think last time I checked, 81% of companies in the UK are running it. And it's actually causing more harm than anything else. It's actually causing more harm. And for me, you can't train the bias out of anyone. And I think what we need to do is we need to look at the fact that it's a design fault, right? Bias training was actually born out of a desire to make organizations. It wasn't born out of it wasn't born to make organizations more equal. It was actually born to make organizations avoid litigation, right? It's a design fault. It's a waste of money, but also it just powers more potential damage and harm. That's what it does. So we just need to really, if we're going to deal with a problem, what we need to do is we need to just start describing what it is really accurately. So it's not unconscious. When we're at a point right now where we are asking people to have humanity, where we are asking people to, we're negotiating collective punishment, we are negotiating a ceasefire, we are, if that is where we're at and we're still talking about whether that's unconscious or not, then we need to be really, really clear about it's not unconscious, right? These things, let's just describe the problem, what it is really accurately, because people will just say, okay, right, oh, sorry, it's unconscious. And people say, sorry, it's my unconscious, but it's okay, I can carry on behaving the way I behave because it's unconscious and everybody's got it. So I'm going to carry on causing harm and inflicting harm. And let's be really, really clear of what the consequence of that is. And that is people losing their lives. So it's not a joke. So for me, saying that it makes me sick is an understatement. So it causes harm. So I am not here for unconscious bias training, implicit. I'm not even here for saying the word, because what it does is it gives people with power and systems. This is not even people. This is systems. And by design, it allows things to continue and cause harm. So, and there's evidence. There's evidence. It continues. So yeah, I'm not here for it at all.
No, that's okay. And thank you for the courage of both of you sharing. The sincerity of what you both bring into my world. It just really honors. I think I can't say it enough. Really, it's not easy stuff. But it does make people feel safe when they know the gravity in which the conversation can go, and that we move beyond sort of HR speak, the idea of what we're supposed to say or what feels like performative behaviors, to something that really does unrest us a bit, I know we get this cliche of we have to be uncomfortable with, we go to be comfortable with discomfort. But I think when you're marginalized, you are consistently in discomfort.
Yeah.
So being asked to get comfortable with discomfort when you're already in discomfort seems always a little bit challenging. But I think there is something, and I suppose this is where I'm going to touch on a little bit, is do you both feel like, if I think about it in terms of the context of race or misogyny, and the same definitely must be applied to homophobia and transphobia, is that these conversations are not just about good or bad people, or whether people have interpersonal biases around these things, but whether we've built a society or a world, or certainly a business structure, that is hardwired not to welcome that. Is that a possible truism historically, and is it present today? And I guess my challenge is that I'm much more interested in people talking about systemic change, recognizing racism, for example, misogyny, etc., as systemic issues rather than interpersonal ones.
Yeah, I think we have to look at it systemically. And I think this is where we can have a better conversation if we look at it systemically, because what you then get is it's like what Vic was saying. People think, well, I'm a bad person, and the defensiveness comes in. But if we start looking at if you look at white supremacy culture, right? You just look at what stems from white supremacy culture. You've got individualism, you've got the sense of urgency, you've got defensivism, you've got power hoarding, paternalism, that the worship over the written word. You've got the either or thinking. You've got the quantity over quality. All of that are symptoms then that allow the transphobia, the homophobia, the racism, all of that. That is your systemic behaviours that come, and it's capitalism. It's all of that occurs, and we all, in some way, shape or form, we perpetuate that in the fact that, we want to be a perfectionist. We want to get things done quickly. We then people power hoard. We can see that happening today. In the world, we can see that happening in an organization. Do things quicker. We need to hit that deadline. We all perpetuate it in one shape or form. So we can all see how that then occurs in organizations. We can see how that occurs. Sometimes how we perpetuate that. So if we can see how we are perpetuating a white supremacy culture, we can start having better conversations about how we can start to dismantle that. Right? It starts being you're and then, how does that then become, institutional racism, interpersonal, individual? We can see how it stems up, and it allows those behaviors to occur. We can have better conversations, but it stems from colonization, white supremacy culture. It allows us to have better conversations. So we have to.
Thank you, Hannah. Vic, thank you really very much. Anything more to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, Hannah said it really perfectly, but it keeps me thinking about, Hannah, the way you were talking about the way we individualize these things, and it does, like you're right, it does need to be systemic. We do need to look at this as a collective thing. I think we do live in a society that really encourages people to see themselves as a solitary island in control of their contributions to things. When you hear about things like the idea of a self-made man, when there's no such thing, there's not a single person on the planet who didn't get where they are because they were carried on the shoulders of everyone around them, their entire community, and the generations before them, and the same to each other. But we always look for solutions that come down to each individual doing one thing. Just a really, I think, easy one that I think everyone's familiar with is, like the whole thing about, we know there's a big problem with plastic waste. So what do? We tell people to stop using plastic straws. Mm-hmm. But actually, the vast majority of the plastic waste is coming from big, industrial-sized processes that are going on, huge things going on to do with, industries level fishing and that kind of thing, and realizing that we can individually do things that make us feel like we're in control of the situation, feel like we're doing something, but isn't actually making large-scale change, isn't actually changing the trend of where things are going. And it's about finding ways that we can use our energy collectively to do better and to communicate with each other. I think the aspect of this that needs to be individual work is the part that is about making yourself vulnerable to learning about the things, anybody who's in a position of privilege, taking the time to sit back and be willing to listen to people who have very different experiences to you, be willing to hear a community saying to you, this is what we're going through, this is what we're dealing with. You might not have personally decided this is how the world is, but this is the world that we're living in and we need to do something about it. We're in a situation right now where a lot of us, I've seen right now that people are just being asked to witness the things that are happening. It's been alluded to where we've been discussing, but talking about the situation we've got in Palestine right now, people are just asking us, they're not even asking now for us to do anything, they're just asking us to witness. And that's kind of, I don't even know how to say the right words, because horrifying doesn't begin to even encompass it. I don't know what we do about this. I always try to be hopeful and forward thinking and look for solutions, very solutions oriented. And sometimes I worry if my approach to doing that means that I'm not looking at the full scope of the problem because I'm looking for the quick win. And maybe that's where things like unconscious bias training come from. That desire to just fix it instead of sitting back and actually letting people create the kinds of larger collective movements that can really make this happen.
And I think it's just what you said there, because when the gaslighting, so okay, there's a plastic issue, so it's your fault, so stop using plastic straws. However, when there is a global issue where, as individuals we come together and we're saying we don't want this to happen, it means nothing. So when there is some punishment, or we're going to punish a whole collective people, your individualism means nothing. So when we're going to punish marginalized folks, what we're going to do is we're going to punish you, and your voice means nothing. But you know what? When there's a problem, it's your problems. As individuals, you deal with that. So, and I think that is the way. So it is, again, it goes back to this culture that we have, this white supremacy culture, that actually it's individualism when it suits, and it's the power hoarding. And how does that then give us this sense of, I guess it's isolation.
Yeah.
Isolation, that it comes back to, that you have power, but no, we'll give you power when you want to have it. And how do we then start to really to dissect that and actually say, this is how systems have been built, and this is the impact of colonization. And actually the work that needs to be done is decolonization work.
Absolutely. Decolonization in itself is very much in its infancy, and it has a visceral reaction to people. I know in academia, where it's, certainly in universities, it's a conversation that's been growing over the last 10 years. Workplace cultures, I don't think there's a presence of that at all. And yet there is a conversation of anti-racism, but, and I think we've touched on it plenty in this space, and I think the chat has demonstrated that as well, some of the chat, that these things can feel tokenized, that they're still about conscious or unconscious bias rather than structural barriers and the assistance and the urgency to break structural barriers that prevent so many people participating safely and psychologically. Knowing that socioeconomics is at risk when they raise their voices, knowing that their questions of competency may be at risk should they raise the wrong kind of anti-racism conversation. And this applies to marginalization every day. But it is a systemic conversation. I don't want the audience to be baffled by that or threatened by it, but I certainly would last to sit in the quietness of this afterwards. And what is it that might be structural rather than good or bad people? What is it that says it's not about whether a person is a member of the EDL, for example, or not being a member, that marks their credentials as being a good person, but rather, what is it they do when systems are every day? I know we're touching on the sensitivity of Palestine as well. I think that globally we're watching a genocide. More fundamentally painful is we're watching the normalization of a genocide. This, I find, speaks to the value of life all over the world.
It is, for me, I just think it's, I think we're in a, I find it really, I think it's the systems that we have. I think it's the education. I think it's the way that we consume information. We now have social media. We have so much, and I think it's it's the dehumanization that has happened of people is, again, who do you see as human? One thing I have seen is that so many people that have spoken up when we talk about bias is that, people may not realize that there is all different religions, people that live in Palestine, for example, that there are Christians, there are atheists, but people are just always seen as Muslim, right? People are seen as Muslim, they're all seen as Arab. There's one person that you would imagine that lives there, right? And I think we are also all seen as, it's almost like, well, anything that happens, they deserve it, because on films we have seen that people that are Muslim are all in films we are portrayed in a certain way. There is a narrative that comes with it. We all sometimes think that that's who we are. We've been asked to condemn since before we even knew what that word was. That's probably my fourth word, I'll be honest. So there is a narrative, and sometimes we even gaslight ourselves. And I think there is, and that is how systems and narratives have been put into place to allow this to happen, the dehumanization of people. Our trans siblings have had that as well. We just see dehumanization and systems that allow it to happen. And then it just, people grow up, and sometimes people don't want to do the work to understand where those biases come, and it just kind of gets perpetuated. So, and it takes work. It takes work. I'm South Asian, so if someone says to me, Hannah, are you racist? I have to say yes, because with anti-blackness, it's rife because we've grown up in a white supremacy. Do I work at it every single day? Absolutely, yes, I do. But I can't deny the fact that I grew up in a system where anti-blackness was perpetuated. Being South Asian, we have to be really honest with that. But I've had to dismantle everything that I have learned and rebuild, and it's whether people want to do the work, and it's lifelong work that exists, and that's why I do what I do. So I think it's really understanding, but again, it goes back to understanding how systems are built and why they were built that way. Yeah,
and we had the fortune and the solidarity of having that conversation, which I think is a video in itself of anti-blackness that lives and thrives within the Asian community. And I know this was one of our early conversations. And the courage of that conversation, I think, is yet to have its day, really. I'm just going to add an example as well. I know a big part of my life is in Palestine, working with farmers and fair trade. And I often find when I'm in a discussion about Palestine that I feel the need to express that I'm not religious. And I wonder sometimes, quite often, about why does that happen? And why is it that I've got to seek a space of validity, as if my comments or my thoughts can't be just sincere or real. My connection to Palestine is only through religion, which is not. My connection is through justice and learning from the greatest people in the world to teach me what survival and farming and heritage looks like. But yet I find quite often in new conversations, I'm in a rush and I wonder what I do and what has done into me internally to create that. And often I'll be asked where I'm from when I'm doing a stall selling oil, but then I wouldn't necessarily ask a dear friend who happens to be English or white where he's from. And I know there's a natural curiosity, but what baffles me is when I say I'm from Bangladesh, there's always almost a sense of, so how come you're doing this? And I find that always almost comical, but it's actually a little bit painful, because it doesn't mean that just because we're from Bangladesh doesn't mean we wouldn't care about Palestine or wouldn't set up organizations to help that. And the paternalism, I guess, is something that Bengalis are not allowed to have.
Yeah.
Palestine, but I guess indigenous English white folks can have that paternalism, and that paternalism is where we navigate biases. So I'm going to ask a question to both of you. It's a simple question. Is there an antidote? I'm going to ask you, Vic.
I think my answer now is going to change just from the conversation we've had than what I was thinking about before. Just listening to both of you, I think I learn so much every time I'm involved in one of these conversations. Initially, I was thinking about the fact that, and I think, Anna, you touched on it a bit about, the personal side of the work, is that it being a lifelong thing. And I think I was initially going down the thought that in a lot of ways, learning to unlearn bias and learning how to move forward, it's more of a therapeutic look at the self than it is anything to do with the workplace or to do with training for that kind of thing. But actually, you've got me thinking more about the importance of community, because I think that one of the areas where individual effort can have an impact is on creating community. I know that we can, with other people in a specific space, contribute to creating a space, an environment where people can be themselves and can be able to open up and say, here is a need I have, here's a situation I'm in, here's my experience, here's where I'm coming from, and to just accept people, from their different backgrounds and different things, and also to give space to having those difficult conversations. I think the antidote is community. It's creating community. It's building, spaces among people. And I don't think I can, tell us all to go out and change the worldwide community in one go. That's a huge piece of work, and that's generations of effort and thinking and collective action and looking at systemic change. But I think the communities that you do belong in, my ability to speak is going out the window, I'm sorry. The communities that you are a part of, whether it's the family that you go home to every day, whether it's the social group that you attend. I think one thing I had thought about before for a different question was, for example, I play RPGs on a regular basis with friends. Well, I did before I got very busy with my current job, with friends. And in those, you kind of create small temporary communities in entirely imaginary worlds where you can, if you're intentional about it and the other people are on the same page as you and willing to experiment with it, you can examine the idea of what would this world look like if we changed this aspect of it? How does that change how we approach these problems? How does that change how we see each other and ourselves? And those kind of questions and conversations that give you an idea of where these things need to be looked at. It doesn't immediately solve anything, but it gives you an idea of what you're actually dealing with to begin with, I think. At least gives you a place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Vic. Hannah, for you as well, is there an antidote?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a radical. I'll be like, so for me, I'm like, yeah, we need to change the whole world. Let's go. And we ain't got time, so let's crack on. So I think for me, it's being able to start acknowledging that actually we're working in a colonial capital system that theoretically has told us that it's intended to serve everyone as equals under the law, but ultimately it isn't. So recognizing that not only are we doing DEI work, but it actually just profits. It serves profit over people, and that's what it's doing. And the social justice activist in me, it doesn't sit right. And I think I've been really, really conflicted over the last kind of 9 weeks because it's there because we sit there and we've watched films and we're like, how did that happen? How did people sit back and just let that happen? We've seen the films, we're 500 years ago, how did people allow, our black siblings to be enslaved? And, how did people let that happen? This right here, this is how it happened. We're seeing it in real time. So we just have to be really honest that social justice has fallen through the cracks, and we're seeing it. We've seen it's just confirmation that dehumanization is everywhere, and we've seen it in pockets, but this is just a mass scale. We're seeing it if people can just flick through their social media saying, I'm just going to take some time off for my mental health. There is a population of people that have not had that privilege, and we have to be really honest with that. So for me, just having that colonial economic mindset, we're just erasing history and reality that the land and wealth that we are living on today has been created and taken from Indigenous people with a really unfulfilled promise that it's been taken to serve all people, and that's not true. So actually, an industry capitalized society that we live in, it's not striving enough to decolonize. And really, the work that we say we're here doing, DEI work to create equality, equity. So really, actually, we should be doing that. It should be a real core tenet of the work that we do. And that really means and that's anti-racism work, DEI work. So, when you see them pillars where it's like the people standing on the steps and it's like equality, equity, justice, blah, 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 all that. For me, it should be the equality, equity, justice and liberation. Like, where's the liberation? Why are we not talking about liberation? That's what it should be, right? So for me, that's the antidote. Where are we working towards actually decolonizing, giving people liberation? That's about. We can't talk about sustainability if we're not talking about people's liberation. It's not. Why are we just accepting the status quo? We're almost like we're maintaining the status quo. We're not replacing a system with anything else. We're just literally operating within the same system. So, and if we keep doing that, all we're going to do is just get to a point and then we're going to go back to equality. And then we're going to do that again. We're going to go back to equality. We're never actually making any progress. We're just doing the same thing over and over again. And that's why nothing's changing. So I guess that's the antidote.
No, I can't help but I'm trying to not almost sit on my hands to share not the excitement, but the solidarity of this conversation, right? It is a collective liberation, and I want everybody to feel safe to that there's a collective liberation attached to everything we've said here, because we shouldn't be looking at this as mental health loss without people of power who may have been privileged, may have done well in historic power balances, but there's a mental unwellness to people who can't see other human beings as equals.
And there's something, when we're having like everyone I speak to is like, I'm in therapy, I'm doing this, and that's great. But at what point are we going to, when everybody you speak to is struggling with their mental health, they're in therapy, at what point are we going to just say, do you know what, the world is unwell, and we need to actually support, like this isn't okay. So the world is unwell, and actually let's stop putting this on an individual and say they are struggling with their mental health and it's an individual's problem, and actually say, do you know what, the world is not well, and the world is not okay for us, and stop putting it on the individual. No,
absolutely, Hannah. You remind me of a conversation I had at the end of Black History Month, and I just sort of share it as a conversation I had with my daughter's picture of her behind me on that side. But she's 9 years old, and she came home from Black History Month talking about the importance of Rosa Parks, and I pretended I didn't know who she was, and then my daughter got a bit like startled that I didn't know and I should know, and then I asked her, why should I know? And she was quite exasperated. And then she said, Baba, how can she helped so many Black people. It was really important for her to tell me that. And I looked at her and I thought, it's good that the school is teaching you about Rosa Parks. But if they still teach you after 50 years, that Rosa Parks, that she couldn't get work, that she had to change her name, she moved to Detroit, that this is about helping Black people, that the idea that Jim Crow's America, people are not well if you can't drink water from a fountain that's shared by a Black person. There's such an ill health that your family can't watch a Black family eat a meal in the same restaurant with you, that you were prepared to riot should a Black child go to the same school as you. This mental ill health has kept you ill for so long isn't being talked about. We're still talking about helping Black people. And so in that conversation, 50 years later, my daughter can only respond to the same thing. She wants to help Black people. And I found myself thinking, when will we get to that point where we're going to have a real conversation about the mental health loss that racism and structural absurdities how they're dehumanizing us all. It reminds me of a quote. I'm going to share that with the audience, and I'll probably put it into the chat, or I'll ask the team to, but I want to share it with you. It was written by Martin Luther King, and then I'll move on to the next question. It's something I found quite transformative, and I want to share it in the context of conversation we're having about biases and who gets to make the change. He wrote this, he was 37, and wrote it from the Alabama jail, Birmingham jail in Alabama. He said, I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride towards freedom is not the white citizen counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but rather the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to the positive peace, which is the presence of justice. I'll share that with everybody, but I often read this and think about it, how we are today. I often think about it when I meet people who say, I don't see color. And I often think about HR rhetoric, that we are trying to strengthen and engage to make better because it deserves to be better and it wants to do better. But we also look at the lack of power transference of any kind, the test of that power transference in conversations that deeply matter because lives are at stake.
Yep.
And we watch sometimes this sense, I feel, that LinkedIn and other places will recoil from these moments of truths.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to know what to do in that space mentally. Very hard to pick up your bags or your sense of idealism or your job, even in some cases. What do we do when no one is surrendering the idea that we are just, as you've touched on in this example of a genocide, and it doesn't matter where it is, but we are talking about EDI, we are talking about collective punishment. And yes, they are not necessarily connected. Actually, the urgency to talk about participation justice means that any civil injury on such a level, anywhere in the world at such a habitual level, should not be afraid to raise its voice in the workplace or in the HR conversations, and not in the places where we're talking about identity and belonging.
And this is it. I think for me, I try and show up everywhere because for me, oppression is oppression and it is interconnected. Because, we could be talking about Palestine today, we could be talking about Congo, we could be talking about Lebanon, Sudan. For me, but also we could be talking about our trans siblings, because for me, the system is the same. The only thing that changes is the people that are being oppressed at the other end, because essentially the systems are the same and the power dynamics are the same. So oppression is oppression. And those that are the most impacted will always be the most impacted. And there is, this is why people always say to me, Hannah, why is it always about race? Because when we look at actually the systems, it is always, when we look at actually how white supremacy culture is the foundation of it, that is why. And everything, when I talked about the culture that comes of it, they allow everything else to happen. That's the foundation, and that allows everything else. And actually, when we want to talk about it, white people suffer too. They suffer from it too. It's almost like a disease that happens, and everybody is harmed by it. So it becomes everybody's problem. Everybody gets hurt by it, and that's the issue.
Yeah. Just as misogyny hurts the aspirations of men, everybody. To be better human being. And
just kind of what you were saying there, what I've noticed over the last 9-10 weeks is that Muslim women, for example, they've really stepped up. But this perception that we're only okay when people want to either tell us that we're oppressed or save us. But now that we're using our voice, people are not okay with it. Especially non-black and brown Muslim men are really not okay. Like, hey, you're supposed to be oppressed, and you're only okay if we're either telling you you're oppressed or we're saving you. So what are you doing speaking? But we're not. We've never been oppressed. You just wanted us to be oppressed because it fit your narrative. But we're out here. We're out here doing the work, just like black women have been doing the work. So it hasn't fit in a narrative, and people are not okay with that. So it's really interesting just how again biases come into play, but also how people want those biases to continue. So this is where I have an issue with unconscious, because it's not unconscious.
You just reminded me of something from a few years ago, a conversation I had with someone, that whole thing about, where you were just saying about, you're only given the opportunity to have a voice when the voice is, oh, you're oppressed, or, oh, we're going to save you. It's that question of who gets the platform and what conversations are allowed to happen. It was a few years ago, I just voted and I came out of the voting booth, and there was one of those people with the clipboard asking questions and surveying, and started going on a bit of a, I think, frustrated complaint that they hadn't seen many young people coming out to participate, and didn't understand why they weren't engaged. And I think, I'd mentioned that if you look at the kinds of conversations that we see happening on the political stage, for example, so many of them are avoiding talking about the things that actually matter, or they're framing, when people come up and say, this is an issue and we need to deal with this, and then you see that taken to the political stage and it's given an entirely different framing that moves it away from the questions we actually need answered. Mm-hmm. Talking about, for example, you were saying, trans brothers and sisters, in my queer community, we're talking a lot about how we can be safe for each other, how we can create community for each other, how we can protect each other, our needs as people, just, the simplest things of being able to go to the right bathroom and things like that. And then you see that taken to the political stage, and people put a completely different framing on the questions to control a narrative. Of course, that leaves people disengaged, because why are you going to try to participate in a situation that won't even allow the right questions to be asked? Mm. And won't even allow the people who are actually living this on a day-to-day basis to be the ones to create the framework by which the discussion is had?
Yeah.
And again, looking at, look at the media narrative we've seen recently and how it flipped when they realized it wasn't working the way it normally does. Mm. And they still keep trying to go back to that old narrative. Mm. And it's finding ways to create, well, not even to create, just to step back and give space to the people who've already been doing the work for, let's face it, decades, if not more, who already know how to frame this in the right ways that actually create change, who already know what needs to be done and just need to be listened to and actually listened to.
And believed. I think that is it's that worship of the written word beyond lived in experiences, beyond, because, I've had, just by me looking like this stuff, people said, well, why don't you go there then? Go to a Muslim country. They will do this to you. They will do that to you. You don't even belong here, but this will happen to you. This will happen to you. And it'll be, John from Essex or whatever, wherever, will be like, they'll do this to you. They'll do that. You won't survive. They will do the most disgusting thing somebody could say to someone. They'll do that to you, to me. And I'll be like, been there, thank you. Had a lovely time. They were lovely. The narrative that comes with, this is what that population, they are, the dehumanization, but the vileness that will come to me for simply existing. Well, if you support humanity, then this is what will happen. But actually what you're saying is not humanity. And it's,
Yeah. So absolutely. There is so much in this. We're running out of time, and already I feel like I need another hour at least, and just in the very least to protect each other, if not the audience, because what we're doing here is truth speaking, right? And it's often so rare. You both, as I said earlier in the beginning, you're both people who make me feel safe without realizing you're doing it, because I know the validity in which you were prepared to hold space. I know the invitation that you make. And I know that it's never an imposition, So so it gives me hope. I'm just going to ask you some questions, really, a couple of questions, really. I'm conscious of time, but I just think that it isn't just intersectionality we're here to talk about. It's an intergenerational responsibility that we have in our hands. That good ancestors that inspired me, Martin Luther King is an example, but there are others, There were good ancestors to me. And I'm a good ancestor to somebody, I hope, that can all I can aspire to be. But I'm asking really, in the space of all of this, in the grace that we're seeking, the love that we need, what is it that you have examples of that give you hope? What keeps you hopeful? If it's in the workplace, then what is it? If it's not, where is it? What keeps you hopeful? I'm going to ask Vic, you first, and then I'm going to hand over to Hannah. This is my last question to you before we close for this. I feel like we should do this for a couple of hours, but and I would like to both of you speak to after this session because it's been so,
I knew it wouldn't be long enough, by the way.
Never is.
What keeps you hopeful?
It comes down to the thing we've been talking about pretty much this whole session, or what I keep coming back to at least, and it is the community around me, the people that I've found, whether intentionally looking for them or just through luck and good fortune that they happened to be in the right space and they became a part of the community that I belong to. I think for me, finding other people who, in whatever capacity they're able, are trying to be involved in this, are trying to think about it, are trying to create spaces where people can feel safe with each other. It's one of the things that I try to go back to a lot. I have a lovely local community of people who pretty much everyone in that group is neurodivergent and queer and different to the rest of the world and comes from a different background to other people and sees things a little bit differently. And, we all have very different needs to the average person. And just in that small space, seeing the ways we try to create comfort for each other. A very simple example, because I'm occasionally nonverbal, my local community of friends I have are the only group of people that I will go out to socialize with while nonverbal. Normally that would be a time for me to retreat and stay indoors and stay away, because how can I keep myself safe and get my needs met if I'm not in a position where I can communicate in ways that other people will hear? Mm-hmm. But with that group, they know that's a part of who I am. Several others in the group have a similar thing going on. I can just turn up like that, go. And they go, that's okay. Do you want us to keep talking to you, or do you just want to sit in the corner and hang out? And I can just point to whichever I prefer. And that's it. I'm there. I'm safe. I'm included. If I have needs, they find ways to communicate. And it's, like I said, I would never normally go out in the world when I'm in that kind of state. But with them I can, because it's safe to. And those are the kind of communities that give me hope that we can do this if we keep working on it.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Just really, I want to meet your friends. Yeah, I want to be your friend. That's beautiful. Hannah, for you?
I think kind of overarching, it's my faith. And I think it's because my faith has given me everything I need. And when I say everything I need, my faith has given me my husband. The way we met and we exist is, I believe, like it was my faith, and that was given to me. And then I think my community and the people that I have around me, but also the people that have been taken away from me that aren't supposed to be in my life. I think the way people have come into my life just when I need them, and have shown up for me in such a way and allowed me to, shown up for me and allowed me to and clear the path for me, to allowed me to be who I am, have the strength and the resilience that I need to show up. Because some days I really struggle to have hope. But for those days, the community that I have and the faith that has brought those people into my life that pull me back up when I feel so hopeless that some days I can't even get out of bed. They're the people that get me out of bed, give me what I need. I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the people. And on the days that I am hopeless, they have enough hope to get me through. So for me, it's okay to be hopeless those days, because it doesn't last for long, because they pull me through. Because when those days when you feel hopeless, wow, it's another feeling of hopeless. Some days, I think, not last night, I slept for 50 minutes because I felt hopeless. But it doesn't last for long because I have such great people around me. But I have my faith has brought me, because it allows me to do what I want and be the best person I can be that attracts those. So I'm so grateful for my community.
Thank you both. I'm going to hand over to Ellie, but just for everybody listening, just to thank everyone for being here, for you two particularly, Vic, Hannah. The conversation of love, community, friendship, faith, it's all that anyone can ask for, really. And I hope that binds us all. I'm going to hand over to Ellie now. We'll use the last part of the time, but I just want to thank everyone for being here and the courage in this conversation, especially when it's not so easy for us to be here and show up. You're incredible people. You've given me hope, so I'm going to stop there. Ellie, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. The three of you, thank you so much. There's obviously so much to continue thinking about and talking about there. I think both as individuals and as kind of like collectives and communities, it's highlighted the level of individual responsibility that we all carry here. And I think, what you see, to go back to that initial question about bias training, is that training that's not led by lived experience and that doesn't put both an onus on us as individuals to work consistently hard at unlearning and deconstructing, while also recognizing the structurally reinforced and often societally celebrated exclusionary practices. That training can often serve as Hannah said, an excuse to continue causing harm. So thank you for highlighting that and for your honesty, passion, and constant work for equity, diversity, inclusion, justice, and liberation. We'll be returning in the new year for our 5th panel, which is on what does it mean to be an intersectional leader. That's on Wednesday, the 24th of January. So hopefully we'll see lots of you there. And if you're missing us over the festive break, you can watch the first 3 panels for free in full on our YouTube channel. So we'll link that in the chat now. Remember that we are a lived experience-led organisation that does provide training. We don't do unconscious bias training. So if this has made you reflect on the ways that your organisation could be actively creating safer, better spaces, then feel free to get in contact with us, because we'd love to help other organisations work on that as well. And thank you again to Hannah, Vic and Atif for joining us, and to everyone in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.